answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump yesterday and media availability with India Prime Minister Modi. He announced it a couple of times during the day, but it was pretty interesting to hear Trump address the reciprocal tariff issue specifically to India, as well as generally in terms of his approach. And here was that offering.
That's what I've done, and so we are being reciprocal with India. Whatever India charges, we charge them. So, frankly, it no longer matters to us that much what they charge, because whatever they charge. I had discussions with India in the first term about the fact that their tariffs were very high, and I was unable to get a concession. So we're just going to do it the easy way, and we're just going to say whatever you charge, we charge. And I think that's fair for the people of the United States, and I think it's actually fair for India. Okay.
It sounds fair. And now, as we've talked to Steve Moore about this, if Trump's use of tariffs as a leverage point to reduce barriers to trade and reduce tariffs on U.S. exports, okay. And this seems to be what happened. His tough talk in the presence of the India Prime Minister led to an agreement, reportedly, to fast-track a trade deal, ramp up U.S. energy and defense sales, and crack down on illegal immigration. In fact, India pledged to buy more U.S. oil, gas, and military equipment, with talks of F-35s now in play, after Trump vowed to match India's tariffs dollar for dollar to ensure, quote-unquote, fair trade. Trump and Modi also discussed sort of Indo-Pacific security issues, and it seems like there is more collaboration vis-a-vis China between the United States and India, and that's a positive development. But is the reciprocal tariff policy, the sort of simplicity it sounds that it sort of confers when you hear it, fair is fair kind of thing, does it belie complexity when it comes to externalities that could be thrown off economically by such a policy? To discuss that with us, we're pleased to be joined by our former colleague, now the founder of the League of American Workers. He writes at stevecortes.substack.com. Steve Cortes, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet. Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Reciprocal tariffs, as one economist, Doug Irwin, writes in an op-ed, well, there's some problems with that, including it effectively outsources U.S. tariff policy to foreign countries. We're just going to do what you do, and we're going to do to you what you do to us.
Yes. Well, and I would say, though, that's at a minimum, right? Of course, we can do more, particularly to a predatory country like China, which has been abusing American workers and American industry with predatory mercantilist trade policy now for 2.5 decades. So it doesn't mean that would be a minimum, but it means we can do more. But I'll tell you, I'm very impressed with what Trump has done. I think it does, just from a messaging perspective, politically speaking, it makes sense to folks. We found out as a toddler that fair is fair, and that we should the golden rule works in life. Treat people as you want to be treated. But more importantly, economically, what Trump is insisting on is that look, the United States is the consumer envy of the world. Every company, every country on earth wants to have access to the American market. We used to essentially give that away, even to countries who were abusing us in return. And we did it for important reasons, especially during the Cold War, right? That we wanted to build up an alliance, that we wanted the Western world particularly to be strong and prosperous and united because we sort of had bigger fish to fry, and we were willing to give economically, even though it didn't really make sense from a negotiation standpoint. With the Cold War over, though, that mentality should have faded away. It didn't, unfortunately. And it's one of the reasons why Trump won. It's one of the reasons why, and won twice now, it's one of the reasons why populism is so ascendant in the United States. I think anybody who takes a rational look at what happened to the United States, particularly after allowing China into the WTO on terms that were incredibly favorable to the Chinese Communist Party, essentially allowing them free, unfettered access to the United States while there was no reciprocity. We did not have the same access at all to China. And it eviscerated American industry. It ruined entire regions of the United States, particularly in your part of the world and in the Midwest. And I think folks took a look at that and said, wait a second, the social cost here was not worth whatever amount of cheap goods we might have gotten at Walmart. And it might have only been cheap in the near-term sense, but not in the larger sense.
Yeah, but there's a lot of ways to get to simplicity. And like I said, maybe this the simplicity of the messaging, as you said, about reciprocal tariffs belies complexity. For example, the Wall Street Journal editorial board opining on this. The harmonized tariff schedule includes some 13,000 codes for different items. So bureaucrats would have to adjust some 2.6 million duties for imports from the world's countries. Businesses would no doubt lobby for exemptions, as some are now doing, for the 25% steel and aluminum tariffs that President Trump announced this week. And so, you know, it sounds elegant in its simplicity, but in terms of the reality of making these adjustments and opening the floodgates to corporate lobbyists to carve out exemptions for preferred businesses and sectors, then is it so simple?
Right. No, listen, I get that. The implementation, I don't think is simple at all. The principle is simple, right? But the implementation can be quite complex. Now, thankfully, with the advent of AI and advanced technology, much of this can be automated, right? But I think more importantly is that, let's say it's so onerous because of the implementation part. If that's the case, most of the onus then, the burden of proof, is going to be on these foreign countries. And why is that? Well, because they need us so much more than we need them. Exports are just not that significant an amount of the American economy, particularly compared to our peers, right? Countries like Japan, China, and Germany, in terms of our economic peers, they only thrive on exports and largely exports to the United States. And so given that reality and given that lack of incentives for the United States to have to rely on exports versus the contrasting view of our economic peers where they absolutely must rely on exports, we have all the leverage. To use an analogy, it's like the United States has been sitting at a global poker game of trade. And by the way, it never was free trade. Okay, that was a chimera. It was never free trade. It's always been managed by big companies and by countries, and largely managed against the interests of American workers. But when we sit down at that poker table of negotiations, the United States has always had a royal flush because everyone needs access to our giant, wealthy consumer market. But we acted forever like we had a pair of eights in our hands. And Trump came along and said, wait a second, you've got a flush. We're going to start playing like it with these other countries. And it just makes sense because, again, they need us so much more than we need them.
Generally speaking, that's true, but there are politically sensitive sectors and businesses where that may be less true. For example, this week, Ford Motor Company CEO Jim Farley said that Trump's 25% across-the-board tariffs on Mexico and Canada would, quote, blow a hole in the U.S. industry that we've never seen. So, all those auto workers that threw in with Trump in the Rust Belt, if all of a sudden some of those impacts are felt downstream in terms of their employment, then you've got a political problem in a sensitive sector, don't you?
Yeah, no, listen, and I will tell you this, by the way, the one place where I didn't agree with starting the tariff situation was with our neighbors, Mexico and Canada, and particularly the Canadian side, because at least with Canada, you have the issue of border enforcement where the Canadian authorities.
Well, they're going to be our 51st state pretty soon anyway, so what's the difference?
Pretty with us. But in the case of Canada, I just don't buy the idea that they've been really problematic on border issues, right? And thankfully, the northern border in general hasn't been a major problem. I'm not saying there's not issues, there are, but nothing like the southern border. So to me, but look, here's, I think, the bigger point. Because we have essentially voluntarily surrendered, we sort of unilaterally disarmed in terms of trade negotiations for many decades. And again, we had good reasons to do so during the Cold War. We don't any longer. But because of that, rectifying this situation is going to be messy. There's just no way around it. It's sort of like I would actually tie very much to the border situation. In other words, like the deportation operations that we're now commencing, they can get messy and they can be really, really difficult and hard to implement. But we have to do it. Why? Because we were totally derelict before. same kind of thing here in the economy. I'm not saying that all of it will go smoothly. Now, we can be smart about how we implement it. But the point is, what we want to compel is onshoring back to the United States as much as possible, that the goods and services that we consume here are produced here, and that in terms of the critical goods and services, things like chips and medicines, all of them are consumed here, or are produced here. Not just some of them, but all of them are produced again in the United States, because we certainly found out during the pandemic and during the unfortunate panic to the pandemic, we found out that we were incredibly exposed and dependent upon adversary nations, particularly China, and that can't happen any longer. So how do we compel that onshoring? How do we have a manufacturing renaissance here again in the United States? It's through carrot and stick. I mean, on the carrot side, let's make the conditions wonderful to produce here. On the stick side, let's make sure that there are punitive measures if you don't produce here. I'll give you an example, because you mentioned autos. The American South is dotted with foreign auto manufacturers, both Japanese and German. I'm speaking to you from Chattanooga today. We have a massive Volkswagen plant here. When Volkswagen comes and makes cars in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and sells them all across America, there are no tariffs. So let's have more of that. Now, that's really only happened at scale in the South, because the South also made business conditions terrific for these foreign companies. So that needs to be done, nationwide. But in addition, the punitive side matters. The stick side of that equation matters to tell these foreign countries, hey, if you want to get around the tariffs, it's an easy solution. Come and make it in the United States and employ Americans, and then you're treated just like an American company when you invest here and hire here.
Yeah,
Steve
but what
Cortes.
are the tariffs? Well, real quick, but what are the tariffs on American cars that are trying to be sold in Europe?
Right. No, they're very significant, and that's Trump's point, that we're no longer going to. We're no longer going to tolerate what you're doing to us in your countries, and I think that only I think in its simplicity it does make sense. Also, I would say Trump ran on this clearly. Tariffs are polling in a very positive fashion for Trump. People know, just even if they're not really into economics, they just know intrinsically that America's been abused, particularly by China. And I think it's smart policy and good politics.
Steve Cortes, founder of League of American Workers. He writes at stevecortes.substack.com. Steve, thanks as always.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Hey, heard you're getting ready to move.
We just listed our house on the market.
Just make sure you have the right attorney.
Doesn't the real estate agent take care of all that?
They stay involved, but you want to make sure you have a great lawyer that's negotiating the terms, helping resolve inspection items, clearing up title issues, preparing the deed and other documents, and attending the closing.
The attorneys at Nauman & Associates in Elk Grove Village have decades of experience handling real estate transactions every day all over Chicagoland. NALawGroup.com.
Are you an administrator, staff member, or parent volunteer at a private school? Would you like to grow your current enrollment and welcome new families to your school? If so, we want to tell you about a great opportunity to help increase enrollment and promote your school to families all across Chicagoland. It's called ChicagolandSchoolVouchers.com. They work to connect private schools with new families who are looking for discounted first-year tuition. In exchange, your school will receive a marketing campaign to help grow your enrollment. Chicagoland School Vouchers does all the work to bring new families together with your school and help you expand your reach. They've been working with schools across Chicagoland for over a decade. As the demand for school choice grows here in Illinois, your private school needs to take advantage of this program. To learn more, just visit ChicagolandSchoolVouchers.com. That's ChicagolandSchoolVouchers.com.
During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places you can't control. Between payroll, your home office, your tax preparer, and the IRS, if your W-2 gets exposed, that's